Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our next episode of Driving Greater Social Impact. This will be our third installment, which will be focusing on doing more with less. We really appreciate everyone taking the time during the holidays season to take a few minutes out of your day to go through this webinar with us. We'll be doing a very brief introduction about Process Fusion. We'll have our introduction from our guest speakers, Roger and Brian Porter, and I'll give a brief introduction. The topics of discussion today will be specifically on how to drive efficiency of doing more with less, like what avenues exist. The key categories will be around operations, security, what types of automation there are, how AI is affecting agencies, as well as we'll discuss at the before closing off just different grant opportunities that are available to help agencies initiate these new initiatives, followed by closing comments and Q&A. So with that, I'll just get right into it. So overall, Process Fusion, which many of you haven't heard of, is a digital transformation organization. However, we have grassroots over the last 20 years working with agencies within Ontario, and that work has really expanded to larger scales of growing to provincially and then nationally. This has really started from grassroots where we supported agencies from small scale doing program services. And now we are a major service and back-end service provider for many agencies within Canada. But it goes beyond just supporting these agencies in the work we do with them from a technology lens. Our hope is to really help move the sector forward and support the agencies and the sector through collaboration and insight sharing. Today's whole purpose is to provide information, not just from ourselves, but from other agencies on their experience and how best practices of helping deal with modern day problems. Specifically, as most agencies are under many constraints with staffing shortages, labor, inflation, constantly becoming higher issues, how can agencies become more efficient in their operations to either grow capacity, provide better quality of service to their clients, and overall be sustainable? So how Process Fusion typically work, the areas that we support most agencies with is really around program services, finance, and really IT and systems integration. When you look at the ecosystem, as you could see within agencies, those are some of the core elements which we focus on, where we consider ourselves subject matter leads on developing optimal systems for counseling, intervention, youth employment, and different other sub-services, as well as integrating these into a cohesive model, which includes finance, front-end client service management, donations, marketing, and system admin, and basically helping agencies execute their future transformational plan, and regardless of the technology they use, how this can be used to help in that manner. So with that, one of the first cases I'm happy to introduce is Brian Porter. Brian Porter has a very long history within Family Services Toronto. This agency is over 109 years old, and I would say even in the past 20 years has grown from a smaller agency, which has supported around 3,000 clients regionally in Toronto with about a $2-3 million budget, to now supporting over 76,000 clients across all of Ontario that manages and processes about $500,000 in claims annually, and manages from funding administration over $450 million from the ministry. The second speaker we'll happy to introduce is Roger Mack, who is the VP of Development and for Nonprofit at Process Fusion. He has extensive experience dealing with high tech, coming from the high tech industry, with experiences from NASA in dealing with some of their shuttle project management, and even leading the way in the flight space and flight simulations for the F-18 program. Through this, thankfully, Roger has come on board into Process Fusion to help us lead the transformational initiative from the sector going forward. So with that, I'm happy to introduce both our guest speakers. So thank you so much, Roger and Brian, for joining us today. I think the first thing is we'd like to start is, as agencies have been struggling, especially in Ontario, right? Doing more with less is an easy thing to say, but there's a lot of challenges that surround that, right? From limited funding to inflationary costs, it's hard to find staffing, and agencies are constantly being pushed with higher service requirements, improved levels of service, but not enough resources. And I think the first, Brian, is as Family Service Toronto has been at the forefront of this, and you've grown in such size and scale. What's your experience with this, and how have you, like, the challenges you've had?
Well, thanks very much, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon with everybody online and with Roger. I would say, certainly from the scale of an operation that I've overseen for the last 6, 7, 8 years, and with the growth that we've incurred, we are now at roughly, in terms of our size of organization, around 250 staff. And the biggest issue has been managing in and out of the pandemic in terms of our online support now as staff start to work or have been working remotely for the last 3 years. And I think we're faced at the moment with really being clear as to the model that will move us forward. The majority of our staff are still working largely from home, and we are in the process of establishing norms for how that hybrid model will continue to work. Managing inventory in terms of laptops, as you would expect, has always been a challenge as we've been working remotely. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was all about getting technology in the hands of our staff. And I think along with that has been the increased recognition of our security requirements and compliance with legislation. I know we'll be getting into some of those issues in more detail through this discussion this afternoon, but certainly those are two of the biggest issues that I've had to deal with personally in terms of our organization and the size of our organization.
I think one of the key areas is, based on our conversation and looking at industry trends, we've identified like really a few key areas, right, of looking at how agencies are doing more with less, right? And I think for today's purposes, we're going to be focusing on the 4 categories that we've identified, especially with Brian, your expertise, which is around operational support, security and compliance, because many agencies have to do more, but these are real hurdles. Automation, it's a very big word, but what does that really mean? And how can this be applied to agencies? And with all of the new trendy things that are going on with AI, how is this even relevant to agencies today? What impacts are there? How can this help agencies rather than displace jobs? And then in our part 2 seminar, we'll be bringing a few additional speakers to talk about how to effectively deal with resource management and donation optimization. So I think even starting, Brian, like FST was an organization which had, I believe, like about 100 staff initially, most located at your 9 sites. And now you have, I would say, 300 staff plus, or 150 staff, and majority are working remotely or in a hybrid environment. How has even managing this effectively been, and doing this without jeopardizing the agency?
A huge piece of this has been around how do you track the amount of equipment that is suddenly leaving your premises. And for us, the solution has been the remote software that we're using to manage our tickets and our operations overall. And we're just launching a new ticket application that will also allow us to ensure that on each of our laptops, wherever they may be, we have an agent that allows us to know all the information about the laptop at any given moment. So that wasn't at the beginning possible in terms of our system operation and in terms of being ready to change gears quickly. I think like many organizations, we needed to respond. We were able to get a supply and inventory of laptops out to our staff. And now it's really managing that. Everything from people starting with us and getting the equipment to them versus people who are leaving the organization and getting it back. We do have a fair amount of people coming in and out of the organization and tracking all of that hardware. And it's not just laptops. We also often provide monitors as well as wireless keyboards, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of inventory to suddenly manage, and you must have a system in place to do that. So that's certainly been a big part of our operational on-site work, and it requires somebody to be on site to manage all that as well.
Well, Brian, can I add to this? Now, in keeping with the idea of starting with do more with less, I think your organization has scaled up quite significantly, and you're highlighting this particularly in recent years because of the hybrid workforce becoming like it's gonna stay with us, and this creates tremendous pressure on you to manage the assets. And you're saying that in order for the organization to continue to scale, you need to tame this piece, which is managing the assets,
Correct.
particularly for the remote. And you're suggesting that, hey, there are many things to do, but one of the things is to look at the help desk, keeping track of the assets and managing the request for equipment or repair or things like that, right?
Right. And as well as providing support. I mean, obviously our ticketing system allows us to sort of decipher the type of problem that is occurring for an individual, and our support staff will respond and as quickly as possible. We try to manage our tickets. We have probably an average of 300 to 350 tickets during each month.
And we sometimes take the ticketing system for granted. Well, the whole organization has ticketing systems, right? But they could be fine-tuned or tweaked to meet the particular need. Right? In your case, I think you tweak the ticketing systems to keep track of the assets and to deal with the equipment, things like that, right? So minor like tweak to the help desk help you with managing the assets.
Yeah, and frankly, that's the only way I think to manage the scale and scope of an organization that has as many as 250 staff like ours or more, obviously.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I think that really leads to the next area.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know we could probably spend an entire discussion around security and compliance, but I think one of the core elements I'm hoping, Brian, you could tell is this is really being a gatekeeper, right? This is being a gatekeeper for most agencies and how they've had to adapt and manage both information, staff engagement, and dealing with clients, right? There's many processes, but how have you dealt with this and specifically?
Well, to answer the first question on the screen about why has it become a priority, I'll tell you how much the landscape has changed in just a year for us. So a year ago, we were fortunate to begin a process of rolling out multi-factor authentication. And that was a project essentially that started with staff training and ended ultimately with a move to a new cloud gen improved and security enhanced virtual private network. It was a big project. But the timing was perfect because a year ago was when our insurance company that provides our cybersecurity insurance said to us, what steps are you taking to ensure against breaches and fraud, et cetera, that obviously can happen through that cybersecurity network? So we began to need to answer a lot of questions that we previously hadn't had to address. And because we were underway with this multi-factor project, it certainly allowed us to answer the questions and provide the information and allowed us to ensure that we would continue to have the level of insurance we need, as any organization needs these days, for protecting against cyber criminals. The other piece, which is critical, is the audit that was recently done. In fact, it's just being finished by KPMG on our Passport One operation, which is our claims payment provincial program that was referenced earlier. And we serve in that particular program. We dispense over $400 million in claims payments across the province to 50,000 or 60,000 clients. So it's a big project and a big outreach. And the audit requires us to describe in detail and provide levels of input on our cybersecurity protocols and practices. So these are new areas that as a nonprofit, we didn't really have to address in any formal way, even as early as 2 or 3 years ago. But today it's become a real priority.
Yeah, Brian, we've been talking to other agencies as well, and in fact, it demonstrates that you have the foresight to enforce or improve the security. Last year, many agencies are now saying that they are not able to get the cybersecurity insurance, and I think the moral of the story is, before we can scale up, take in more staff, support more remote or hybrid workers, you need to take care of the securities to reduce your risk exposure. I think that's the moral of the story.
You know, absolutely, because if you incur a breach or some intrusion, you know, your trust and your reputation as an organization could be jeopardized. And so it's a critical part of our understanding as to what method, what compliance and what steps we must take to protect against breaches and to protect our data and the privacy and confidentiality of our clients.
Thank you. So I guess the next topic is really, once we get the foundation laid out, is automation, right? And we talk about automation in so many different ways, and agencies are using this throughout their work processes in different areas. I think when we talk about it from more with less, it's really an efficiency, right? And Roger, you dealt with such high tech and bringing that level of expertise. How does that become relevant and to agencies today? And what are types of automation that would be valuable, right, for both frontline staff that benefit them, as well as the operational backend support?
Yeah. Well, we spoke to many agencies, work with many agencies as well. Everyone wants to be able to do more with less. And of course, one of the popular approaches is automation. But as you alluded to, right, this automation is a load of word. It can mean many things, different things to different people. So like I can explain what types of common automations agency can apply to gain efficiency. Number one, everybody heard about CRM, client relationship management. We've been working with agency to improve their client relationship management. But you know what? In many cases, particularly in the operation side, they don't know what CRM is. They refer to it as a database to keep track of the client information and the case load. The modern CRM can actually do more than that. They can actually keep track of everything about the client, the sensitive data, the funding information, of course, the case noting, and it can automatically generate report for you as well. They can process payment, which is an important aspect these days. The fee for service is an important aspect in a lot of organizations. The ability to process fee for the client for the service they acquire is important. The fee could be paid totally by the client themselves, or could be partially funded by the funder. So all these features, you can expect this from a modern CRM systems. Moreover, you can flip to the next slide. Moreover, modern CRM system can also moderate or manage the workflow process as well. On a diagram here, I'm showing an example of the workflow that we implemented for counseling service, right? Counseling refer to family counseling, youth counseling, employment counseling, like or even mental health counseling as well. So there is a industry practice on how we handle that, and things how we keep track of the engagement with the client. So all these could be managed within the CRM as a workflow. In the end, the benefit is you reduce the administration overhead. The staff doesn't have to remember what to do, remember what process to follow, and remember when to follow up with the client or the caretaker. Of course, it will do reporting as well. And because without a modern, without a strong reporting systems, we know there are a lot of agencies, they spend toward the month end, they spend a lot of time gather the data. They even have to do double data entry. They have, besides the database they have to keep a lot of information in a separate spreadsheet so that they can do a quarterly report to the ministry. So all these can be achieved through CRM automations. I want to talk about other types of automation as well. This is becoming quite popular these days. People refer to this as robotic process automation, aka RPA. And there are different types of use case for RPA. There should be back-end processes, things that you do not need to see in the back-end. For example, once you authorize the payment to your client or to your vendor. In the back end, you can send the payment information from the CRM to the ERP to actually initiate the payment. And then the board can also send an email to the client as well, or to whoever stakeholders. So this can be automated through RPA. So in a way, you call this a modern way to do macro. Right? The RPA makes it easier to implement this kind of automation without heavy programming. Okay. And then and the second type, I call it the front end. Back to the previous slide. I call it the front end processing. There are cases you cannot do back end projects. You can simply the system do not have a way for you to do the back end logic. For example, we work with agency that they right now they need to do double data entry. They have to enter the case log information in their internal CRM, but they also have to copy those information and duplicate it or not copy. They have to type the same information to the external partner site. It could be the ministry site for the case log reporting. So that's double data entry. So this is the case that we can use RPA to act like a person to transfer, simply do copy and paste of information from one CRM to another CRM. That's what I call front end processing. And that could be a bit more, the third example I use could be a bit more mundane kind of process. I call it the data archive or migration. Next slide. In fact, this is something that I actually helped Brian to do as well. Last year, in Family Silver Toronto, they migrated the CRM system to a modern system, as I call it, right? And in that process, they have to archive the report from the old systems. But the old system doesn't have an export, doesn't have an API they can talk to. The database is so complicated, you cannot just talk to the database. So we use and also the report, you have to actually go into the screen, click a couple buttons to run the case note report, right? So we use RPA to do work like this, to act like a user, click the buttons and generate the report, and then we archive it. And I think that project we moved 60,000 case files in about 6 to 8 weeks time.
Yeah, I just add from my personal experience working with Roger on that project, the data migration was a huge part of our efforts to move to a new CRM, essentially, as Roger was describing earlier. And so we now have a new system for managing our client data. But access to files for all kinds of reasons is critical, in terms of potentially a legal case that may occur on a case that involved a client, say 5 years ago. We need to be able to make sure we've got access to that data from the previous system. So it was quite stunning to learn and observe how these robots managed to crack all the data and move it into a new archive, essentially, that we can now access for the period as long as it needs to be. And it was an important part of the project, for sure.
One thing I want to comment on this RPA or this robot is, even a couple of years ago, even though this is a hot topics in the industry, right? But RPA tends to be very expensive. The licensing expensive. The technical skills required to use RPA is also pretty high. But this technology has gone down, not gone down, has become a bit more simple to use. And they have also gone to a cloud-based service as well. So the customer no longer need to get the expensive license and run it on their own server. Now it's cloud-based or a subscription-based, a lot more user-friendly to get started as well. And of course, it also becomes a lot more cost-effective, has an automation solution. Compared to a couple of years ago, you know what? Getting a board, to get people to set up the board and they use it in-house, that was a very expensive experience. But now we get it to very manageable costing. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So there's one more thing about RPA as well. When people talk about RPA and people understood it as an advanced macro, what I want to highlight is this. When you are looking into RPA projects, don't look at just the technology, look at the governance as well. The RPA board acts like a user, acts like a human. So you need to set up policy or governance for the board to behave. Governance on security, error handling, error detection, self-recovery, activity logging, alert, and reporting. All those governance has to be set up and train the board. The board needs to be trained not only to do the job right, they also need to train to avoid problems and and work with human to do the job correctly as well. So this is what I want everybody to listen to. Don't just focus on the technology, focus on the practice of using the board.
I think one of the, just to really recap, Roger, is almost every organization has some sort of case management or database. From my understanding from your conversation, it's really looking at how to build intelligent processes, even in your existing system, or looking at new types of technology that really give time back to the frontline staff, right?
Yeah.
And even with RPA, the technology is really, how I see it, as a digital helper, right? Whoever you choose and how you choose it, it's about, from my understanding, it's capacity building, right? If your frontline staff or clinical counselors are supporting 200 individuals or 10, it's about reducing the amount of workload and administrative side so that they would be able to spend either more time with the existing clients to improve the better quality of service, or the number of clients that there's existing supporting. So this way you can still technically do more with less. Is that a fair statement?
Again, everything we do, even though I'm talking about technologies, right? Everything we do had to start from the business objectives. The business objectives usually is about gaining efficiency, gaining productivity, conforming compliance, and increase the engagement of the client, improve the quality of service. So always start from the business side, and the technology will support it.
Perfect.
I would just say, I think for anybody who works in IT or has been exposed to a lot of work in information technology over the years, it always comes down to two things when I think of IT. It's about needs, identifying the needs, and then let the means follow. In other words, don't try to start figuring out how to do something until you really have identified what the requirements and the needs are. So needs and means. That's IT at the end of the day.
I think our next topic is really one of the biggest hot topics that everyone's dealing with right now is AI, right? As people have seen and used ChatGPT in their day-to-day lives, or even responding to emails or proofing information, how is this becoming relevant to agencies these days, right? It is still a clinical or individual, people-based help to help individuals, right? But how is AI going to play a role in supporting agencies going forward, and from building capacity or helping them without becoming a burden or taking away the human element? So maybe, Roger, you could talk about the different element that you see AI and the applications for it as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think earlier this year when we saw ChatGPT, we felt that could be the end of the world. So I think that ChatGPT made AI popular, but I want to go back to the basic. I want to talk about the different types of AI. So next slide. In fact, AI has been around for quite a while. Before ChatGPT, when we say AI and machine learning, it's usually about analytics, and there are common applications on regarding these what I call conventional AIs, analytics, and I think Brian can have some examples as well. In the AI world, you can say there are real typical applications. Classification is one. Classification is identify what is based on a lot of data. It could be from picture, you could identify whether it's a cat or dog. But for the agency, it could be we could use it to you could use an interview video of a conversation to your client to determine whether the client has a depression symptoms or not. This could be one example, right? And it could be based on the data, you can see whether you can project whether you have financial cash flow problem, some of the program or not. So this is classification. Number two is prediction. Prediction is estimate what will be based on historical data. The example is maybe when the temperature in Toronto, when it drops below 10 degrees, the demand for shelters will increase by 100%. This is based on historical data. You can predict what could happen under different conditions. The first type of application that we probably call regressions, right? Discover insight based on a lot of data. This is something that you have a lot of data. Could be your conversation with the client. It could be reimbursement information of the client as well, or from the funder. Based on a lot of this information, you do not know what to look for. Then you find meaning. You find correlations. For example, we could be exploring social media posts, and compare it to the mental health status. And then you can see there could be some correlation when you see this kind of social posting, when you see this kind of word in social posts, then you detect there could be mental health situation with the person. So this could be just discovery, using information to discover meaning, to discover correlation. So these are the three typical application with the AIs. And agency can actually use, because agency, well, when very often fund the demands you to collect a lot of data. And the agency said they collect the data, they report it, but they do not know what to do, how to use the data. And we're suggesting that you can, with the vast amount of data you collect on the client, on the service you deliver, and on the outcome, you can run a lot of prediction. You can run a lot of regression to find meanings. These are plenty of examples. Brian, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, this whole discussion on artificial intelligence is so critical today. It obviously reminds me of the time when the internet was beginning to evolve way back in the mid-90s and into the later 90s, and how basically the world changed as a result. And I think the tipping point is close for AI, and your reference to ChatGPT is a good example. I mean, suddenly it's students are going to ChatGPT to write their essays, and that's a pretty scary idea. And it has an influence and an implication for so many different things. So I think it's important for nonprofits to really consider carefully their goals, their needs, and potentially the ethical implications of using AI technology. Roger, you've given a couple of great examples. The predictive analysis and analytics is a good example of where a nonprofit might be able to use AI in a way that makes a lot of sense and is a way that could be integrated into current practices. I think the key piece here, though, is the need for collaboration, both in the sector as well as outside the sector, because introducing AI isn't something that the sector alone obviously can manage on its own. And so collaborating with technology experts, data scientists potentially, and technology partners are obviously going to assist nonprofits make informed decisions about how to leverage AI for the greatest benefit for their mission and the communities they serve. And I believe that there's still a lot of important conversation to happen about AI, obviously, before things really change dramatically.
Yeah, well, I want to highlight the fact that for the Passport One program, in the past few years, the ministry actually funded the Passport One program with a lot of data scientists to do report to D-Analytics. The ministry cares about it, and you're doing it right now. And of course, we don't just do it for the sake of doing it, right? We want to gain insight from it, right? So so the rest of the world, we need to take advantage of the data you have and find meanings in it. And of course, we have many ideas. We'll move on.
Yeah, and just to close on that, I mean, data is clearly everything today, and metrics and measurement and the ability to be able to tell a story using your data is critical. And that's the way the story of funding and other opportunities will continue to evolve.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about generative AI as well, which is what made ChatGPT made it popular. Next. Just to recap what ChatGPT can do, right? We trained it. It has a very good language skill. It's trained on vast amount of knowledge up to September 2021. And it's good at organizing information in the conversation. That's what is built in ChatGPT, but that's not what we use it for, honestly. The potential is really in custom learning. Now, we actually, Process Fusion has been experimenting with ChatGPT for custom applications. For example, it can be used to generate support or training materials, because we can train them, we can feed them a lot of raw information and ask it to organize and create documentation automatically. We can also train it to become the automated help desk. And when customer call us to report on the problem, and they can describe the problem, and the ChatGPT can actually provide suggested solutions. And that could actually work for counseling service as well. We've been spoken to agencies to suggest whether they can create a language model to do a pre-screening of mental health problem as well. So this can be one of the applications of ChatGPT or large language model. And third, it's about service navigation as well. Now, these days, you know what? The ministry, even including the Ministry of Children and Community
Social Services,
which is MCCS, and Ministry of Health, they both recognize the importance of service navigations. So they've detected even with the grant, with the funding they give to the end user, this grant or this funding are based on a reimbursement basis. They can only use it if they can get the service they require. They have been reported these funding are underutilized. They have approved more fund than they were, but they're underutilized, meaning they're not getting the service they need. Service navigation is important, but these days service navigation is pretty old school. It's just a directory of service. They're no different from a phone book. The next generation of service navigation is you come in, you tell you're on the website, you tell them what your issues are, and it match the provider for you. We recommend a therapist. We can recommend a particular therapist specialized in early childhood psychology, who had experience with relating to family abuse or family violence situation. Like they can do that kind of thing, matching. And this again will be done in a very user-friendly manner with this kind of AI. The third type I call it a bit more mundane, but it's very it can generate benefit quite quickly as well. It's form processing. Now, if your organization that's still accepting form, it could be handwritten forms for reimbursement, or could be an invoice for the vendors. There are technology out there who can convert the forms into electronic process so that it can be processed faster. In the end, what we look for is not the fancy technology. What we look for is to reduce processing time. If it's payment, we can pay your vendor or your client on time. They can for the hospital, we do what we call a service requisition. Then we can process the request quicker. Then we can provide the response much quicker. And in some cases, it could be reducing your wait list. We have customers in UK in the autism program. They're still accepting a lot of intake on paper forms. Their wait list is huge because there are not enough people to enter the data into the systems. So they need to convert the paper forms into electronic so that they can. That's one of the way to reduce the wait list. So this is an opportunity to use AI to speed up your process, to reduce human and data entry, things like that.
Let me just say, I think the key word you did use is opportunities. Artificial intelligence, AI, it certainly presents lots of opportunities, Raj, but before you actually begin to execute, there's a lot of other work and conversation that has to happen. But opportunities for sure.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of different points there, and especially like what was important to me is there's real world applications today, right? In your forms in different areas, like wait lists and different procedural information that can be used or automated, right? And these could be high administrative or low. So thank you so much, Roger and Brian, for that. But this is all fun and good, but I think the biggest thing is failure, right? Like forget about technology, but these are relatively new ideas and concepts. How do you avoid failure when looking into these areas, or at least mitigate the chances that they don't the failure is low, or you can overcome that? How have you guys dealt with this in your experience?
Well, I'm going to start on by saying that there's nothing wrong with failure. In fact, failure is actually good in some ways, because failure can actually be a really valuable learning experience. So, if challenges arise with the introduction of a new type of AI implementation, it can be important to analyze what went wrong and to make the adjustments that are going to be necessary and apply those lessons to the next endeavor or use of that technology. I think, you need to go into, particularly with the introduction of AI, a mindset of, I would say, continuous improvement. And adaptability is really essential when working with these rapidly evolving technologies, because whatever we're doing with it today, sure as heck next month or next year, things will change again. And that's part of the challenge I think we all face in the world of technology. It just keeps changing at such a rapid pace. AI and failure, there can be complex, challenging situations, but I think there are certainly strategies to mitigate the risk of failure. And I would say going into a project, you've got to have pretty clear objectives. I would think that you should also start small, not big. I think you should absolutely make sure you've got the expertise, that you have access to questions, because internally you're not going to necessarily have all the answers. Ensuring data quality is sacred, obviously. And lastly, and I think that this is one of the most important points, is understanding the change management applications, or implementing these technologies, and what it will mean for your workforce, what it will mean for your organization, and what it will mean overall. It's mostly for your clients.
I'd like to add to this. We were told actually, from the ministry standpoint, they initiate a lot of projects, but not all of them succeed. The reality is, when we ask about how to avoid failure, the reality is there's no one thing you do to succeed, and there's no one thing you don't do to fail. There's all usually there are multiple reasons, right? If I'll just highlight a couple of ones that to echo what Brian has said. Can you click? Number one, I was called without a good understanding of the business objectives, values, and the means to achieve it. Previously I said that we focus too much on technology without understanding the business need behind it, and to create the business driver, and get the buy-in from all the stakeholders. That usually spell failure from the very beginning. We have seen organizations who spend a lot of money on implementing a CRM. It does what it was supposed to do, but you know what? In the end, the whole organization hated it, because it didn't get the buy-in from all the team, all the relevant stakeholders. So buy-in with all the stakeholders is important. But the last point I want to make is one of the common failure is we failed to plan for failure. It's a different way to say learn from failure, right? But I think it's important to don't assume everything. Always assume assess your risk, have a effective risk mitigation plan as part of the project. And that way, when so-called shit hit the fan, you don't panic. You know how to deal with them. But that's just some of the ideas.
That's great. Thank you, Roger.
You asked. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'll just jump to the next questions.
Yeah. So I think lastly is just like how your best practices are.
Right. I really want to highlight this because with the nonprofit organization, most of you deal with people. You deal with a lot of your organization has people, has professions like physiotherapists or social workers. But when you want to bite into or take on some initiatives, maybe technology initiatives or transformation initiatives, you want to make sure the team has good ideas, some good understanding of industrial practice. I highlight several here, right? When you identify it, you can look at how to do a human-centered design, and you can look it up from idea.org. When it comes to planning a project, apply sound project management technique to plan your project, right? When it comes to execution, follow the Agile and Scrum approach so that you can build incrementally and you can deliver value incrementally as well. When you're considering launching or introducing a change to the organization, follow the organization change management best practice and to gain the buy-in or adoption from your user communities. So these are the few things. There's no shortcut. There are a lot of best practice out there. Just have to learn about it and work with the partners who understand this and to implement them.
So Roger, I would add one more to that, and it's essential, and that is the communication to your stakeholders, right? And certainly to staff, and keeping them apprised of areas where you are beginning to make a change or you're considering even making changes. It's important that staff and other stakeholders that you are associated with, of course, whether it's your funders or your board of directors, keep people in the loop. You will find that it pays off. Always. You can never go wrong with communicating to those people who need to know.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay. And really, like, where do agencies start, right? We've identified so many different avenues, from automation and the different forms to AI. Like, there's looking at the ecosystem of an agency. How do you even see where is a quick area to find? Sorry, maybe not quick, but finding these areas of improvement, right? If this is like Brian, even within yourself, how is FST identified the areas that they needed to improve? And Roger, when you evaluate most agencies, where do you look and what's the methodology to find areas to improve?
So, I mean, I would suggest that most organizations have a strategic plan. Usually that's a 3 to 5 year plan that looks out at the changes and things that you will need to address over that time period. So that's a good time to identify areas for improvement. And in the process of working on a strategic plan, you would gather input from various stakeholders, try to assess where things need to change or improve. You would be doing some sort of assessment of your current state, of course, and making sure, most importantly, that your IT goals tie into your strategic objectives as an organization. It's, I think, as Roger indicated earlier, it's very critical to make sure that you are in line with where your organization is going and the mission and the vision of that organization.
Yes. Now, at my level, I go at a bit more detail because Brian talk about the strategy, strategic, corporate objectives. Then when we come in as an outsider, as a consultant, we actually look at the business process in more detail. You go into this next slide, I'll illustrate some of the ideas, right? We'll perform an assessment to discover, understand your business. And this assessment will include understanding what kind of service you do, what kind of business process, what are the staff, what are the responsibility, what kind of data you collect, what kind of data you generate, what kind of technology you're using as well. So we first of all simply understand the business, how it's being conducted. Then we align it with the business, with the visions, with the corporate strategy and objectives, and we identify fit and gaps. And you need to you're hoping to improve your donation streams or online donation stream by so much because you know you're not grooming your donor effectively. So you see the gap, and then we want to identify opportunities and how to meet the gap. Then we'll look at the technology. What viable technologies out there to meet the gap or to improve on the situations, right? So we help the organization to co-create a technology roadmap plan, or it could be a near term, could be a midterm, could be a long term, to improve the business could be through technology adoption, could be through technology improvement or process optimizations. And of course, then we do the implement, and as we implement, we could go back and come back to what we call continuous improvement based on what we deploy, and then we get feedback from the actual result, and then continue to improve on this. So this is how we as a technology organization would help nonprofits to improve.
Thanks a lot, Roger. I think with that, we're going to go to, I really appreciate, Brian, you taking the time to come down via subway.
My pleasure. No problem.
To come meet with us, especially in person, being the hybrid. Roger, really appreciate your insights. Thankfully, from your experience, nothing's blown up on an F-18 or what did you say, NASA? So I'm sure that the processes you have done, it's still running. So let me just go to any remaining questions, if there's any. There's not. So I think the last thing is with most areas, like you had talked about this really briefly, but I think it's just worth mentioning is there's a culture, right? And change with most agencies has been very hard, right? Both from the key frontline staffing as well as internal stakeholders. And Brian, especially in yours, how is communication, and Roger, how do you see that facilitating these change? We had Dan talking about this from United Way on our last one, but I'd like to expand on this because this is a more detailed conversation, specific things that matter to people in their day-to-day jobs, right?
Well, I'll just say from our perspective, obviously communication in this environment that we work in, that is this hybrid world that we're all operating in, has changed the picture for a lot of organizations for sure. And we're in the process of rolling out a much expanded and improved intranet to make sure that we can connect with our staff wherever they might be working. And there are new platforms available, of course, through obviously Microsoft 365 provides through Teams, or additional applications such as Viva Connections, which we're actually going to be employing on a new SharePoint cloud-based platform. There's so much opportunity for both horizontal communication as well as vertical, as well as informing staff as to changes or things that are being considered. And also speaking about issues of the day that are current, that as an organization, we want to develop some thought leadership around issues like mental health or gender-based violence, or the developmental services sector where our passport work occurs. And lastly, around the sort of root of much of the issues that our vulnerable populations struggle with is the poverty that we all are aware of and that we see in a big city like Toronto on a daily basis. So I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of communication, and there's these new platforms and opportunities again to connect us all virtually in this crazy world we're all living in now.
Talk about communications. In the nonprofit sector, because as I said, right, typically it's the people service business, right? I see a lot of good communicators in the agency I deal with. So in terms of communication, in terms of language, people are usually very good. But what's missing is collaborative communications. We've seen organizations individually or as a team, they're very good at communicating with each other, but they lack a cohesive communication or messaging for across the organization. The team, they don't understand what the corporate objective is for a particular project or initiatives. They fail to create buy-in because they are not able to standardize on common so-called language or terms, particularly on a more a newer project like a CRM or lead
Multi-factor authentication,
things like that, right? They just well for them, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be very patient and communicate not only with make sure people really understand what the implications are and address the emotion as well. And the communication has to address the emotion. People need to feel respected. They need to feel being listened to. Unless otherwise it will not be effective.
Yeah, and well, so I would argue that that's where I think an expanded and more of what I would call a modern intranet with all of the capabilities that I was talking about earlier is really key. Particularly when you don't have staff sitting at a table with you, they're sitting virtually somewhere else, and it's important that they feel as connected as they can, given the world again that we're all working. So, and informed, staying informed is kind of great.
You know what? Process Fusion, we actually we do a lot of internal communications to make sure whole staff understand what we are trying to do. Always, when in doubt, over communicate.
Right.
Okay,
Stay informed.
Stay informed. Yeah.
Yeah, so really, thank you so much for Brian and Roger for taking the time out of your busy days to just provide some of this insight information. Just as some of the closing remarks for this, as even just getting off the ground, many agencies may not have the funding to even initiate these projects. As Roger had identified, some of the analysis and assessments of creating that plan from, as Brian said, from the initial strategic plan to actually, how am I going to develop measurable results and outcomes, connecting the dots. There are quite a few grants related to this. This is one of those areas that we just try to help agencies identify areas of opportunity that may align with automation and connecting the dots for capacity building and accessibility, right? And if there's an opportunity, we'd love to work with you on these areas. So I will send a link to our grant page on different opportunities. And if it's appropriate, we'd love to share more information. Lastly, just to close off the seminar, we'll be sending the recording of this as well as a quick 3-question survey, if you would be able to provide just your details so we can just ensure that we provide more relevant content going forward. So I wanted to thank everyone for your time and really appreciate you joining us on this event. And we'll be hosting our next one, which will be focused on donation optimization and talent management in the next few months. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful summer. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.